Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. We're down at my buddy Jason Stevens' nursery, Superior Plants. We filmed here a couple times. We did a really cool grafting video with him here. Hasn't been watched a whole lot over the years. I think it's really interesting video if you're interested in knowing how things are grafted. He showed that off in a video, and we've had him in a couple other videos. And we're down here shooting some video content. It started raining on us, came in a house. You may hear a little bit of rain on top of the greenhouse in the background, but I wanted to just show you some interesting plants that he does here. He tends to grow some harder to root things, some things that have to be divided or grafted, handled a little bit differently overall than other nurseries. So he tends to do a few more specialty things overall, and some newer things that people haven't jumped on yet, that, you know, they're newer to the market and that kind of thing. Just kind of trying to think ahead of the group, more so than some of the other places that, some of the other nurseries that are out there. A lot of specialty things here, and again, newer things. He actually does a lot of things from the Ralston Arboretum though, because we're in Benson, North Carolina right now, which isn't that far from Raleigh, and some of the interesting varieties at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum are represented in this nursery. There's some Ralstons, hardy Viburnum obovadum, which is a dwarf Viburnum obovadum, which is a native viburnum to the southeast United States. I've talked about it a lot over the years, but one of the things about this plant is here we are 3 days after Christmas, and it's in a hoop house, but the doors are open on the end. It's not a closed-in space. And here they are in bloom. I've talked about that a lot. This thing will bloom anytime it's just kind of moderate temperatures. It's in bloom. It's amazing how long this thing flowers. You'll see them in a tray like this. They're competing with one another, so they seem like they're tall and narrow, but they're actually low and shrubby with any kind of space given to them at all. On the other side of the entryway over here is a dwarf acarus or sweet flag. I'll grab one of them real quick. Sweet flag tends to grow in moist spaces, so you can grow these around rocks and any place that's got water. And when we do video content down at the Giberson Garden down in Athens, Georgia, Ram has acarus or sweet flag planted literally right in the water, basically along the edges of the water, along the streams, and you get this chartreuse color on it year round. So great little plant. And this is a little dwarf one right here. There's trays and trays of Dwarf Mondo, which can be used as an alternative lawn in shady spaces, or grown between rocks, grown between pathways. Great little plant. Even it, though, look how much it'll stretch if it's in competition with one next to it. So typically really like a carpet down near the ground. There's a lot of other Mondo grasses as well. We'll see a couple more as we back up. I think these are Serendipity Magnolias, similar to Stellar Ruby Magnolia, which I've shown on the channel. This one, Serendipity gets a little bit wider overall than Stellar Ruby does. The leaves look slightly broader. Either way, it's one of the Michelia type or banana shrub type magnolias. He's got a lot of them, a lot of root. These are rooted cuttings. So he's basically rooting these. And in some cases, these rooted cuttings are either going directly to another nursery to grow out, or he's growing them into a trade gallon container, 3-quart container, and then he's moving them on from there. And sometimes maybe he's finishing them in a larger container, but for the most part, he's getting them started. This is what I did in the nursery business for 20 some years. I started things as rooted cuttings. Sometimes I sold them as a rooted cutting. Sometimes I grew them out another season outside and got them ready for another grower basically to take them and finish them, and then end up selling them to whatever garden center or box store or wherever they ended up, or landscaper could get them from there. There's Screenplay Hollies. He's rooting Screenplay Hollies for the Southern Living Plant Collection. I think this is going to be a really, really great holly in the future. These aren't individual pieces, but this is what a rooted cutting, when I say rooted cutting, this is what I mean. He's licensed for this plant. This is a patented plant, you know, for the Southern Living Plant Collection to root these, and then can sell them to other nurserymen to grow them out. These will end up in that brown Southern Living Plant Collection pot that everybody's familiar with. Super, super fast growing upright holly. We have one of these in the garden. It's going to be an individual plant video coming up on this plant on the channel. And this thing was so loaded up. It's self-fruiting and was so loaded up with berries a month and a half ago. It was just wild how great this is at self-fruiting. This thing's trying to flower even now here in the greenhouse, but really cool. Put this back in here, but that's a well-rooted cutting there. Some Chinese, here's another example of a viburnum. This is a Chinese snowball viburnum, and look, just basically moderate to cold temperatures. It's in flower, so they'll bloom in the spring and they'll bloom in the fall, just because, you know, any kind of moderation in the temperature. They don't tend to bloom in the heat of the summer or the coldest part of the winter, but any other time, they're apt to throw out big flower clusters like that. Let's see, what else is in here stuff? There's some Black Mondo. Did we do a video on Black Mondo? We did, right? There's on the Garden Plants channel, and I don't think I've moved this one over to the main channel yet, but Black Mondo is certainly really great plant. These are slow growing. This is another example of Jason growing something that he's willing to put patience and time into, because these, the green foliage Mondo grasses grow, they're still slow, but this is, the black one is just incredibly slow from a division. So you'd pull this out of the pot and you'd divide it, okay? And then, but to get back to this point, you might take a year or two to get this container filled back out again. So it's absolutely amazing. The patience that goes into that Black Mondo. Looks like it would grow. It's easy. It's not like it's, you know, causing a lot of problems over here, but it'll sit here. It'll sit there for a while. Here's another Mondo grass that's kind of cool. This one's called Sparkler. I can get one of these out of here. So our typical Mondo grass will have, see these blue berries on them, which are really quite beautiful. This one, Mondo grass has a narrow, very narrow foliage, but this one has a super, super narrow foliage, and it gets a little white flower spike on it. It's probably one of the better inflorescences on a Mondo grass. So typically we don't think about Mondo grass as flowering. It has a flower spiky thing on it, but it's not flowering per se. But this gets the really a showier inflorescence, and then these really bright blue berries on them, and then that super thin foliage on top of it. A couple more little plants in here I'll show you real quick. Let's see. This one's really cool. This is one that Steph wants big time. This is a cool little plant. That is a dwarf variegated Mondo grass. Look at that. And I showed you on the other Dwarf Mondo where it had other Mondo grass up with it. It was a little bit taller because it was stretching a bit, but that's typically more compact. But look at that variegated Dwarf Mondo grass. It's beautiful, right? So if you've watched the channel for any length of time, you know we love cast iron plants, and so many great variegations out here in the world. This one's got a really broad variegation. It's kind of interesting. Every single leaf has a slightly different variegation on it than the last one. I think when we were here last time, he told us that someone had given him this one. This is an unnamed. This is an unnamed one. I don't know. It's not really, you know, I mean, how would you even describe this? Every single leaf has a different variegation on it. So I don't know. I think he's just evaluating it possibly for the future. But again, a lot of times when you release a plant that's variegated like that, you're looking for some consistency in the variegation, some describable pattern that happens on it. That one's got 7 different patterns on it. It's beautiful and striking. I'd definitely like to have one in the garden. We'll see if he ends up naming that or introducing it later. Curly leaf ligustrum. This is one that I grew for years at my nursery. Slow growing, absolutely slow growing beast. I see why Jason's growing these, because it's another one of these that you can have as kind of a specialty plant that, again, it's not a hard plant to grow. They'll end up, typically in the landscape, you'll see these 3-4 feet in height and only about a foot in width, something like that. But it's got that it's a curly leaf Japanese ligustrum. That's what it is. And it's just simple, really great plant for growing in a container or in a super narrow space where you want something that grows kind of super slow. That's the space for that. He grows a lot of camellias. He grows some of the Southern Living Plant Collection ones now, and then a lot of other varieties that he has. These are Camellia japonicas here, and I used to get camellias, finished camellias from Jason in the fall and in the spring for my garden center. Actually, there's another holly here called Christmas Jewel. This is another one we have in our garden at the house. Broken branch on that one because it was next to the path here. But you see how heavily this one fruits even on a very small plant. And this plant would have been, at the time it flowered last year, half the size it is right now, or even less. So as a rooted cutting last year, this thing flowered and actually set fruit on it. This one for us, we had it in a container for a long time. It was doing well. We put it in the ground in the back corner back there and didn't water it for a little while we were on one of those trips we were on, and it lost a lot of its leaves. All I got to do is shear the top out of it and it'll flush right back out from that. But Christmas Jewel is definitely a good upright narrow holly if you're looking for an upright narrow holly to put in your screen. Let's jump down a little further down this one, Steph. We actually got our Selaginella braunii from Jason, and this video just went up on the channel maybe 3 weeks ago if you haven't watched it, but it'll turn this, it's called an Arborita Fern is the common name. It's neither an Arborita nor a fern. Selaginella is in its own group, but it turns this really interesting coloration during the winter time. This one's in a house, so it hasn't fully colored up. It still has some of the green on it, but the transition between the two, super soft to the touch, great shade, really great shade ground cover plant for a lot of gardens. He's got a few witch hazels here. We do not have a witch hazel in the garden. We have native witch hazel, and then there are witch hazel species from Japan and China and all over the place. This one's Arnold's Promise, which is budded up, of course. We've seen witch hazels actually blooming in the neighborhood the last few weeks, a little bit early, but they're budded up along the stems, as you would expect from witch hazels this time of year. This one's called Arnold's Promise, and it's Hamamelis intermedia. Intermedia just means it's an intermediate between a Japanese species and a Chinese species. And you use that intermedia when it's kind of a happy medium between the two. Maybe one of the species got really, really tall and the other one stayed kind of small. If you cross those and you get one that's kind of in between those two, you'll see that species name is intermedia because and you'll see the X means it's an interspecies hybrid, and then intermedia means it was an intermediate between the two. Great plant. This one becomes kind of a vase shape, 12, 14 foot tall plant in the landscape, maybe a little bigger in time. Again, we've got native and Asian species of witch hazels that are these are truly spring is coming plants. You know, they'll bloom in February for us, maybe even as early as January. And like I say, a little bit of warm weather even in early January, the witch hazels can bloom. Interestingly, Loropetalum's in the same family as witch hazel, so it has those same frilly flowers on it, but it's an evergreen member of the witch hazel family, where the ones we refer to as witch hazels are deciduous plants. A couple other plants we actually got from Jason. He typically does the Pine Knot Farms open house weekend. So if you look up Pine Knot Farms on the internet and see when their open house is going to be for their hellebore show, they head to hellebore nursery and you can go and buy hellebores when the hellebores are blooming in January, February, or late January, February, early March. I don't know when the open weekends are, but Jason typically goes up there for that open house if you're interested in buying anything from him. Anyway, this is another plant we got from him, this Akuba, this Hasaba Hoshifu. We've done the video for this one on the channel as well. It's a narrow leaf variegated Japanese Akuba with great variegation in it. Really a lot better than a lot of the other variegated Akubas that are actually out on the market. It's been super easy in the ground at our house. It's about 3 feet tall now in kind of a narrow upright form. We could top it and keep it lower and fuller if we wanted to. And then one of Steph's absolute favorites that we got from Jason a long time ago, this is our native blueberry to the southeast United States. And this is a named one called Rose's Blush. Anybody who's seen this in our garden over the last few years knows this plant is always doing something cool. It sometimes has this blue coloration in it. Sometimes it goes to this burnt orange color when it's colder outside. Blooms like crazy in the spring, and the pollinators go crazy for it, and then it sets a fruit that are edible, but very much smaller than commercial blueberries, but they're totally edible. When we had the open garden, we had lots of kids out there sampling the Rose's Blush blueberries, which again, you'd have to pick 1,000 of them to get a meal out of it, but the birds do love them, and this plant's always changing, and it's a remarkable little native to the southeast United States. And then again, this is a named one that someone found called Rose's Blush. Neat plant. So this is the kind of thing that we like to come down to Jason's for, because we can shoot some unique videos of some interesting plants that he's growing down here. So thanks to him. Thank you guys for watching these videos. Are these bounce around, kind of go through some details of some interesting plant videos, something you're interested in? Let me know down below this video, and thanks for watching.